Good evening, I'm Todd Kuntz. Welcome to this special edition of Local News 8 at 6. Jury selection is underway for the Chad Daybell murder trial. We have team coverage for you tonight. Linda Larson is here with me in the studio with exclusive interviews. Savannah Hankard is in Boise with what happened outside the Ada County courtroom today. But first, our Seth Ratliff has been following the jury selection all day long. He joins us now in the studio with more. Seth.
Todd, brutal honesty. That's what the state told potential jury members they expect from them as they head into this case. They say this is essential to ensure the state and the defendant get a fair trial.
In this courtroom, the court will give you the law that applies in this case. And you may like that, you may not like that law. But for fairness to this defendant and for fairness to the people of Idaho, we all have to agree, follow that law.
Much of Monday's questioning centered around whether or not the members of the jury pool were capable of being unbiased and impartial, considering the media coverage of the case and that the death penalty is still on the table.
If you were to hear testimony that related to the death of young children, would that cause you to react in a way that would say, there are children involved here? It has to be the death.
No, honestly, age doesn't. The death of anybody is sad.
Several members of the jury pool said they were already under the impression that the defendant was at least compliant in the murders, if not fully guilty. One potential juror said he believed that Chad Daybell was a man of weak character.
I would have to hear the instructions from the court to find guilt and the charges.
Okay, but at this point, your position is the weak character and guilty, but I'm going to listen to the instructions and I'm going to look at all the evidence. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Now, the goals of these proceedings is to pick 12 jurors and 6 alternates who can fairly try the case. In last year's Lori Vallow Daybell case, this process of weeding down and selecting the jury took around 4 days, so it could be a while before the trial moves forward. Reporting in the studio, I'm Seth Ratliff.
Let's take a look at the turn of events that led us to the arrest of Chad and Lori Vallow. Starting in July of 2019, Lori's 4th husband was shot and killed by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Lori then moves to Rexburg. We move to August of 2019. JJ talks to his grandparents for the last time. In fact, it was September 23rd that the children were last seen in Island Park. In October, Chad's former wife, Tammy Daybell, dies. November, Chad and Lori get married. The family calls authorities to do a welfare check on JJ, and Lori tells police that JJ was fine with relatives in Arizona. Soon after, neighbors see the couple packing up their things and leave town. One day before Thanksgiving, police raid Lori's townhome. Now, to December of 2019, Tammy's body is exhumed in Utah, and Alex Cox dies of a suspicious cause. To January, the FBI raids Chad's home in Fremont County. February 20th, Lori was arrested by Kauai Police Department. March 6th, 2020, Lori makes her first court appearance in Idaho. Then, June 9th of 2020, JJ and Tylee's remains are found on Chad Daybell's property, and Chad is arrested. Media from all over the nation then make their way to Rexburg to cover this tragedy. Linda?
Todd, that media frenzy took the city of Rexburg by storm. National and local media drawing down upon the courthouse, trying to learn more about a case that sounded like it came from a horror film. I went back to Rexburg last week, 4 years later, to see how the community is dealing with it. And what we found was a community not wanting to speak and ready to move on. Here's what it looked like now and then. We start with our coverage from 4 years ago.
For months, the whole world has been watching. Where are the 2 Rexburg children? Where are JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan? Tonight, police may be closer to some answers.
A search warrant was served this morning at Chad Daybell's house.
Detectives and investigators have recovered what's believed to be human remains.
Finding the human remains, I don't believe that they're alive anymore.
A small, close-knit community. Hardworking, loving, God-fearing people. dealing with the unthinkable.
I think shock that anything like that could happen here.
Chad Daybell's first wife, Tammy, dying in her home under suspicious circumstances. Her body was exhumed later, and an autopsy showing she had been asphyxiated. And then, months later, 2 beautiful children murdered, their bodies buried in the backyard of one of their own.
Hoping that they can find the evidence that they need to make sure that the justice is served.
We went to Rexburg to talk to the people about how they're dealing with the tragedy 4 years later and how they feel now it's finally coming to an end.
I hope that their family, the JJ and Tylee, I hope their family can ever find peace with all of this. I don't know that you could, but some kind of peace.
It's a peace that the community is hoping to find as well.
But you move on and you forget, but where the children were buried is a very busy traveled road, and it happens to be somewhere where we travel. We have friends that live on that road, you know.
What do you think every time you drive past?
To know how they found the bodies out there and what the bodies' conditions were, and you just like, I don't know, you just like, I can't wrap my head around it, how anybody does that.
Sherry lived in the same townhouses where Lori and Alex lived when JJ and Tylee disappeared, a fact that haunts her to this day.
You know, I don't know where the children were killed at, if it was there, somewhere else, but you know, it was very kind of like, ugh, creepy.
For the last several years, the community has been dealing with the horrific events that threw them into the national spotlight.
I mean, the day that they found the bodies, we were streaming it on at work, and just like, because it's right down the road from one of my coworkers, and
What was that like? Tell me about that.
that was like insane. She's calling her family, you know, like, oh my gosh, do not go out of the house.
From the moment JJ and Tylee were found, the community showing their love and doing whatever they could to help ease the pain.
We heard that Tylee's color was purple and that JJ's was blue, so that's why we chose purple and blue.
For the most part, people will be glad that it's over and that they can, you know, I don't know if you move on from it, because it's always going to be there.
Sherry told me that she is planning on watching the trial. She hopes that the outcome will bring at least some closure to a chapter in their history that they wish had never been written. 4 years later, local News 8 also went back to Chad Daybell's house. We asked neighbors if they wanted to speak. However, nobody was willing to go on camera. The field where JJ and Tylee's bodies were found is now overgrown. The home is now owned by Daybell's attorney, John Pryor, to pay for his attorney fees. When we were filming, someone inside the home started filming our news crew. Sources tell us that more than one of Chad Daybell's children continue to live in the home.
As we told you, neighbors in the area would not talk to us on camera. However, in court, Chad Daybell's neighbors shared their experience living next door to him and his late wife, Tammy Daybell. Local News 8's Kaylee Galaviz was there as they testified.
Hearing from the neighbors in the case gave a major insight into who Chad and Tammy Daybell were and what their marriage had become. Alice and Todd Gilbert shared Tammy was healthy leading up to her death, but saw her and Chad growing distant. They were there the morning Tammy was found dead. In separate testimonies during Lori Vallow Daybell's trial, they both described Chad as emotionless that morning. Todd said, quote, "He seemed like he was businesslike, more so than someone who just lost his wife." Tammy's funeral was only 3 days after her death. Alice got very emotional as she was testifying about the funeral. Then 3 days after Tammy's funeral, the Gilberts say Chad was already talking about his new girlfriend, Lori Vallow, and had plans to marry her. When they met Lori, Todd testified they were, quote, acting like a couple of teenagers first in love. After JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan were reported missing, Alice said she had questioned Chad. She once again got emotional during the trial and stated she knew something was wrong with Tylee when Chad, quote, used the past tense when talking about her. You could almost see and hear the disappointment and embarrassment while Todd and Alice testified. It was clear they really cared about this family, so it was so upsetting to hear how this affected them too. Reporting in studio, Kaylee Galaviz.
All right, thanks for that, Kaylee. Now, Lori Vallow Daybell was convicted of murdering JJ and Tylee in July. In court, she spoke out for the first time. It was bizarre, rambling, and disturbing.
Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths happen. My children are happy. He put his arm around me and he said to me, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom." Tylee came to me and she said to me, "Stop worrying, Mom. We are fine."
However, the judge was having none of it. The judge said the crime scene was so horrific that they are images that he will never be able to get out of his mind. In closing, he called her a danger to society.
You chose the most evil and destructive path possible. You justified all of this by going down a bizarre religious rabbit hole, and clearly you are still down there.
Lori Vallow Daybell appeared in a Maricopa County courtroom back in February for a scheduled conference hearing. You can see her smiling as she walks into the courtroom. She's facing 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder in relation to her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, and former nephew-in-law, Brandon Bordeaux. She has pled not guilty. Her Arizona trial is expected to begin in August.
The entire case began with Kay and Larry Woodcock, the grandparents of JJ Vallow, asking the question, where are the children? The Woodcocks have been the driving force behind the investigation. We talked to the Woodcocks as they prepared for Chad Daybell's trial. Linda, you had the exclusive interview only on 8.
That's right, Todd. The Woodcocks have been an amazing example of strength as they have gone through all of this horrible ordeal, graciously granting interviews and talking openly with the media. They have been to all of the hearings, arraignments, and trials to find justice for JJ and Tylee.
I'm not going to quit. I'm going to be there to support the prosecutors. I'm going to be there to appreciate the defense and hope they can do a just defense. But as I said, how do you defend the indefensible?
But not quitting has come with a price. The trial's taking a huge toll on Kay and Larry.
It's been a nightmare for Kay. She's had a lot of issues with this, and to be able to have your friends and your family supporting you through a tragedy like this, I couldn't do it without it. Kay couldn't do it without it.
Their journey to try and find the missing children turning to tragedy when their bodies were discovered buried in Chad Daybell's backyard.
I'm not going to hurt him, but I wish that he gets all he deserves.
And what do you feel like that should be?
I have, in the last 5 years, I really have come to the realization that there are much worse things than being put to death.
The loss of their sweet grandson almost more than they can take. They talked about the special bond that they shared with JJ and the way he would run to Pawpaw when he picked JJ up from school.
His daddy or Lori would come with us, and he would just run right past them and jump in our arms. And then the first thing he'd say is Pawpaw, 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 I love you. And we lost this. We lost that for no reason.
Larry says the memories of love and happiness that JJ filled their lives with will never die. But their hearts ache for a lifetime of love that they won't get to have with their beautiful little man.
That's what a pawpaw's is. That's what a pawpaw's life should be. Not this. For what? For what, Lord? For what, Chad?
Larry says JJ was someone special who would have grown up to be a great man.
What you think JJ would be like today? What do you think he would be?
He would be the most fun, because when the year or so prior to him being murdered, he was developing his own sense of humor. And it was a dry sense of humor. And I love it. And he's so quick at comebacks. I would imagine that he would be a scholar. I would imagine him being a funny person. There's no doubt he'd be an intellect. And he'd be an amazing young man.
Tell me where your kids are. Where are your kids?
No comment.
No comment? They've been missing for 4 months. You have nothing to say?
Who can forget this moment? East Idaho News reporter Nate Eaton tracking down Lori and Chad Daybell in Hawaii. That video swept the nation, topping headlines across networks.
The couple was married in Hawaii, and that's where Lori was later arrested. It was moments after that interview when police seized a black SUV driven by the couple. This video was taken at the Kauai Beach Resort. Law enforcement also asking Lori to produce the children to prove they are indeed okay. This is a moment in time that will never be forgotten by reporter Nate Eaton. Now, Eaton says that before going to Hawaii, they received a tip. They watched the couple being taken and put into a separate police car, each one of them. They were not arrested that day, which gave Eaton the opportunity to interview them. Welcome back. Let's get right to our special guests. I want to introduce Randy Neal, Bonneville County prosecuting attorney right here with us, and Curtis, longtime defense attorney, Curtis Smith. Glad to have you both with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yes, and we kind of want to get right into it. First question is the death penalty. How does that complicate a case when you're trying to either prosecute or defend someone whose life might be at stake?
And we'll just speak in generalities. We aren't talking specifically about this particular case. The death penalty makes it complicated because there's actually 3 different sets of criteria that the state has to prove. You first have to show that there was a murder. You then have to distinguish second and first degree murder, and only then, if it's a conviction for a first degree murder, you go on to the sentencing phase and you have to find that one of those aggravating factors justify the death penalty.
And I think from the defense perspective, you just have someone's life in your hands, and I think that you take that very seriously, and you're attempting to tell their side of the story and do your best to defend the case. And I think that you feel the pressure definitely when not only someone's freedom might be at stake, but their actual life. So
next, we'll stay with you, Curtis, and we'll bounce back to Neil. They've called thousands of potential prospective jurors. How hard is it to seat a jury in a situation like this, to find an unbiased jury?
Yeah, you know, I think especially in a case like this where we've seen so much news coverage, even nationally, you're trying to get a fair and impartial jury, and that can be hard because people are watching the news, and as the news stories are told, it may be hard to go ahead and find a jury pool of people that can be fair and impartial and that haven't heard a lot about the case. In this case particularly, I would imagine would be a little difficult to do that.
From the prosecution side?
Well, and we've really encouraged everybody through several cases that we're seeing locally here to try to resist that urge to state an opinion. All of that pretrial publicity not only makes it hard for us to find an unbiased jury, but it can create a lot of complications where we have to change venue, and that really deprives the local community of being the peer judges of what happened.
How, as you're preparing for something like this, and you've got a trial that could last as long as 2 months, what does that do to the way that you present it, the way that you deal with it, and the way that the community and the clients deal with it as well?
Right. I think it's challenging because especially when you're talking about jurors, they're giving 2 months of their life to a case, and they've got lives to live. And so I think part of that jury selection has to be who can do it, what kind of things do they have to do to be prepared to last that long. For lawyers and judges, I guess many cases don't last that long, but when they do, you have to kind of find a rhythm and stay with it. Many times you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're just finding a way to get the case done and move ahead. So.
Well, our prosecutors' offices are seeing shortages all up and down the valley, and yet they can't just stop doing prosecution in their local communities. That is a constant flow, and they still have to keep these cases going. When you take folks out of those offices for an extended amount of time, it puts a real strain on getting things accomplished.
Thank you guys so much for being here.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having us.